Hi everyone! So today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different, and this is going to be the first video in what I'm sure will become a series because there's always going to be something new to talk about. But I am going to call this, I think, my HouseplanTEA Ranty series. And so basically in these videos, I'm going to talk to you about some things that I really don't like about the houseplant community or houseplant world, as it were, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that these are shady things that happen in the houseplant community or houseplant world, and they just bug me. They really bug me, and you know, sometimes I need to rant. I need to get it off my chest. I need to make you aware so that you don't get taken advantage of. And so yeah, these might be some controversial topics, though, I will let you know. So I want to state up front that this is all just based on my personal opinion, and we are all entitled to our own opinions. And I am definitely open to discussions if you disagree with any of this. But just try to be polite, you guys. We want this to be a fun, friendly place for people to, you know, have discussions about plants and things in the plant world. So let's just be respectful of one another. And that actually leads me into the first thing I want to talk about today that really irks me a lot in the houseplant community. And that is when people blatantly tell someone that they're doing something wrong or tell them what they should be doing as opposed to what they are doing. Now, giving helpful advice is one thing, you guys. So what I am actually talking about here is literally if somebody comments perhaps on a content creator's video and says, well, you did that wrong. And that's it. That's all they say. That's not helpful to anyone. That's not helpful to the content creator. That's not helpful to other people reading the comments who are trying to figure something out for themselves in their plant life. It's just kind of rude, if I'm being honest. And once again, we're all entitled to our opinions, but there are multiple ways of doing things. I might show you my way of doing something in a video with a plant. You might have a different way of doing it, and that's fine. Doesn't really mean one way is right and one way is wrong, but by all means, share your way as well so that people have multiple ways to choose from. But by just saying, like, you're doing it wrong, that does nothing for anybody. I mean, maybe it makes that person feel better in some way, I don't know, but you know, there are multiple approaches you can take when you disagree with someone, and I think it's just good practice in life in general to take like a polite approach. Like maybe just say, hey, you know, I think you might have better luck if you were to try this as opposed to what you're doing, and here's why. In my experience, XYZ, you know, whatever it may be, but just have a discussion about it. Don't just like drop a you're wrong and not say why you think the person's wrong or offer up an alternative solution. And I would like to say that all of you Aloha plant lifers out there are very polite in all of your comments on my videos. I think I've had maybe, I don't know, 2 where it was a little bit like, But you know, for the most part, you guys are awesome. So you're doing it right. Other people can learn from you guys because you are great. And you know what? A perfect example of this, which is actually going to lead me into the next topic I want to talk to you about that annoys me about the houseplant community. But I actually did have a subscriber watch one of my recent videos, and I mentioned in that video that wet sticks weren't a thing and that you shouldn't buy wet sticks. And this person commented and said, basically, I disagree with your comment about that. But then she proceeded to say, and here's why, and outlined very in detail why she disagreed with it. And that's what I'm talking about. That I appreciate. That is having an open discussion. And I did say in that video that wet sticks was really a whole nother video and that I would elaborate on it in the future. So that is what we're going to talk about now. So I did say, once again, in that video, that wet sticks are not a thing. Obviously, wet sticks are a thing because people are out there selling what are called wet sticks. What I meant by wet sticks are not a thing is up until a few years ago, they weren't. It's not exactly like common practice to propagate plants by a wet stick. And when I say wet stick, for those of you who may not know, what I'm talking about is a cutting of literally just a stick of the plant, no leaf, but it contains a node. And so this really became a thing, and I don't know how to explain a thing versus not a thing. My point is it's obviously a thing because people are doing it and selling it, but it's not really something that is a practice of actual plant growers. So this came into existence a couple of years back when the plant prices really just like blew up. And a lot of that centered around the pandemic, and because a lot of people got really into houseplants during the pandemic that hadn't been into houseplants before, and prices just went through the roof. And so some people out there got kind of, you know, to thinking, hey, I've got like Monstera albos that there are people out there who are never going to be able to afford to buy the rooted versions of these plants that have leaves that I'm selling. How can I profit off of those people? How about I just sell them a node, a wet stick, single node to those people for a price that they can afford? Because at that time, people wanted it. They wanted those plants bad and they were willing to do it. But there are multiple problems with this. And this is why I kind of said, don't buy wet sticks. Now, once again, all of this is just my opinion. If you want to take a risk and a gamble, because as I will explain here in a second, it is very much a gamble when you buy a wet stick. If you're okay doing that, it's kind of like, you know, if you go to the casino and you say, I'm bringing this amount of money to gamble with, and I am going to walk away feeling absolutely fine, no regret, no remorse if I have zero of this money in my pocket when I leave. I think you need to approach it that way. And I will say up front, I want to go back to the viewer who, you know, kind of called me out on this and say that she used a very key word when she was explaining why she disagreed with me, which was the word viable node. Viable being the key word. And that's the problem. Not all nodes are viable. Not all sellers seem to know how to tell if a node is viable. And a lot of people don't know how to tell a node's viable. Like if you're just looking at a picture of a node online to buy, it's not necessarily going to be easy for you to tell if it's viable either. So really, you're relying on the seller, and it's hard to hold that seller accountable if that node doesn't produce. So basically, with these wet sticks, when you get them and you try to propagate them, sometimes you actually can get roots even if it's not a viable node, but then you'll never get any kind of new growth if it's not a viable node. It has to have a viable growth point on it. And there are different things that will determine if it's viable or not viable. But once again, you're putting your trust and your money in someone else, and you have no idea if they are A, honest, or B, actually really truly know how to know if that node is viable. So for me, that's like a big risk. And you know, it's just one of those things where I feel like it would be better if you could just even get like a rooted wet stick that has the start of a new leaf coming out. And why can't the sellers just do that? Like take the little bit of extra time to produce the roots and prove that there's new growth starting and then sell that. And even if they sell it for a little bit more money than what they were doing, it's still going to be cheaper than buying like a wholly rooted with leaves version of that plant. And I do want to state right now, before anybody gets mad at me, I do understand the appeal of wet sticks, especially if, you know, you don't have all the money in the world, because I don't have all the money in the world. Like I can't afford a Monstera elbow. Are you kidding me? Not going to happen. So yes, I understand the appeal given plant prices, but I'm just saying there's so many variables at play here, and there's so like high of a chance that it can go wrong. And even if you do get a viable node, the other problem is you really have to have good experience in how to propagate from a node that has no leaves. And back to my awesome viewer who challenged me on this, she loves doing it. She stated that she loves nurturing them, that she's really good at it. But the thing is if you never have done it before, if you've never propagated just a node with no leaf or anything, there is a higher level of chance that you are going to fail. There is just in general a higher chance of those types of propagations not working out. There's a higher chance, depending on how you're doing it, of rot. So many things. I'm not going to go into full details on how to propagate from a wet stick today. That's a completely different video. But if you don't have experience with it, now you're taking an even bigger risk, because even if it is a viable node, you don't necessarily know what you need to do or have practiced it enough to be sure that this expensive node that you got, and expensive, I mean expensive for that plant because it's typically a higher priced plant that we're talking about here, that you're going to be able to make that successfully work. So if you guys really are thinking about buying wet sticks, I mean, you know what? Maybe reach out to some friends, see if they've bought some before so that A, you can find hopefully what would be a reputable seller. Obviously, if you can find a seller that has some kind of guarantee, great. In my experience, I haven't seen any out there that actually offer that. And as a matter of fact, most of them actually state that they're not responsible if you don't know how to propagate a wet stick, and they're not responsible if it ends up being a dud. So, you know, if you are going to buy it though, like I said, you can ask your friends to try and find that reputable seller, but I would also recommend just attempting wet stick propagation on some of your own plants first to see if you can actually do it successfully or to just learn over time how to do it successfully. So, you know, if you have like just a regular monstera, or if you have like any kind of vining plant you can practice with, cut yourself off a node, remove the leaf, and practice propagating it. If you get to where you feel like you can do it and you're comfortable and you're willing to accept that you might buy, you know, a spent node that's not viable, then by all means, give it a go. But I just think the practice of selling these when it is just so like, I don't know, it's just so unpredictable. I just don't think it's a good practice. I wish it didn't exist. I have a feeling now that plant prices are starting to drop some more that we're less likely to see this. But you know, I also would really appreciate it if some seller would just start selling like wet sticks that actually have been rooted and have the start of some leaf growth, because then you're going to feel way better about what it is you're buying. But once again, to each their own. I'm not shaming anybody for buying wet sticks. You do what you want to do. I'm just trying to let everybody know up front, you know, it's a gamble. It really is a gamble. And if you're willing to take that gamble, that is totally fine. Now, the next thing I want to talk about that I find to be a little bit shady in the plant world, and this revolves around sellers, once again, just trying to make more money where they can make more money, and that is making up plant names so that you can charge a higher price. And what do I mean by this? So you'll see names floating around there. One of the ones that I can think of most recently that I had seen was somebody was referring to a monstera, like it was a Thai constellation monstera, but they were referring to it as a creme brulee. Monstera Thai constellation. I laugh because I'm just like, really? Basically, they had a Thai constellation, and their particular Thai constellation had a slightly different coloring going on to the non-green part of that plant, and so they decided to call it a creme brulee Monstera Thai constellation. Names like this get made up a lot. I mean, I'll do a little bit more research and flash some of the ones, because off the top of my head right now, like, there's been a lot of mint. When you see the name mint on something, lots of times those are made up, and they're doing it just so they can charge a slightly higher price, and that's just ridiculous. That's shady. It's just silly, you guys. I mean, just beware. Like, if you know that a plant name is a legit plant name, great. If you see something that looks like that plant and somebody puts some other, you know, color or name into it and is trying to charge more, I think I would just go find the regular version of the plant that is for the realistic price than to go out there and think that that's a whole nother plant. But just be wary of things. Like, people just make things up. I mean, it's unfortunate, but people are shady in general. Like, in the world, there are just shady people out there. There are great people out there as well, but unfortunately, we have shady people in the plant world, and they're out there to make a buck. I get it. They're trying to make a living, whatever it may be, but I just don't want you guys to get taken advantage of. So always just be a little bit leery of some of these plant names, you know, when it looks like it's probably just a regular version of an existing plant that you're aware of. But while we're on the topic of plant names, there's another thing, and this is kind of a combination of things really, that really annoy me about plant names, and that is, first of all, people like shaming people for mispronouncing plant names. You guys, maybe some of you out there took Latin in high school or college and like you know how to pronounce them perfectly, but the majority of us have not taken Latin. We're gonna slip up and mess up from time to time. It dawned on me the other day that I keep saying Sansevieria wrong whenever I say it in a video. And I always feel kind of silly and like I need to go put a correction in my videos afterwards. But I also just figure you guys know what I meant. You're forgiving, you're understanding. I did also in my last, like one of my last videos accidentally said Peperomia argyrius instead of argyria. Sometimes I slip up, you know, I do my best. I actually feel like I'm pretty good about remembering scientific names for plants. Now, I'm probably not great at pronouncing them all the time. You know what? Let's just be nice, forgiving people and understand that sometimes people slip up, and don't shame people for saying names incorrectly, especially when it's in Latin. Now, another thing about names that really aggravates me is that there are still some very racist, sometimes anti-Semitic names going on out there in the plant world. And this is not really related to scientific names. This is more, you're gonna see this with common plant names, but a lot of people don't know the history behind some of these names. And especially if it's like, you know, if it's not your upbringing, like if it's not your race, if it's towards another race, you might not be familiar with the historical connotation for some of these names. And you may use the name unknowingly, and you might end up offending somebody. So I'm not going to say any of these names out loud today because I don't want to offend anybody. But I am going to put the scientific names of some of these plants up on screen here for you. Now, once again, I'm sure some of you are like dying right now. You're like, but what's the racist common name? I'm not going to get into it. I've given you the scientific names. If you really want to know, you can go Google these and you can figure it out. I know you're all pretty Google savvy out there. But I wanted to show you the scientific names today because this is really what you need to call these plants by. Just avoid using the common names at all costs. Just use the scientific name. Once again, if you mispronounce it, you aren't going to get any flack from me on it, and don't let anybody else give you flack about it either. But we really need to stop using the common names for some of these plants. So there's your little PSA for the day. But moving on, and once again, since we're already on the subject of shaming people for not being able to pronounce scientific plant names correctly, let's talk about well, first of all, just don't shame people in general, guys. It's not nice, but especially don't shame people about the size of their plant collection. And I see a lot more of this geared towards content creators than I do like, viewer to viewer, or my subscribers aren't shaming each other for the size of their plant collection. But at some point, it became like you weren't like at the same level as other creators if you didn't have at least 500 plus plants in your collection. That's crazy, you guys. Like, I would challenge you that somebody who has over 500 plants in their collection, just in their home, living in their home, versus somebody who has like 100 or less in their collection, I guarantee you, if you look at the quality of all those plants and who is thriving, who is surviving, who is looking lush and beautiful, you're going to have way higher percentage of plants that look like that with the collector who has less than 100 than you are with the one who has 500. Now, once again, I'm not going to say that it's not possible that both those people, there could be people out there where in those situations, they all have beautiful, perfect plants, every single one of them. Anything's possible. But in general, I know that the more plants you have, the harder it is to care for them, the harder it is to keep them all happy. So I don't know why people would shame people for wanting to have a smaller collection that's more manageable so that they can keep all their plants looking their best, growing their best, or even that maybe they just have less space and they're just trying to be a reasonable person. Like, don't shame them for that. And on the flip side, don't also now go out there and shame people for having 500 plus plants, because if they want to have 500 plus plants, if they have the time to care for those plants, if they also just, don't care or accept, I don't want to say they don't care. If they just accept the fact that they're going to have potentially like more losses in their collection than somebody with a smaller collection, that's fine, everybody. I mean, you guys, I probably should have reiterated this at the start of this video, but you guys know I say in a lot of my videos, I am a to each their own person. I may have different opinions than you. Let's talk about, hot topics like political. I may have political beliefs that are different than you, but I'm not going to not be your friend because of it. I mean, unless you totally decide you're not going to be my friend because of it, well, yeah, then I'm not going to be your friend. But my point is like, if we have a differing opinion and we have a little debate on it, at the end of the day, we have differing opinions. We had a great debate on it. There goes Toby. And yeah, it's done. Like, we had our discussion on it. I'm not looking to change somebody else's mind. They're not looking to change mine, but I like to hear other people's side of things and their opinions on things. But that doesn't mean that after we've had that discussion, I'm not going to have anything to do with you because you believe something different than me. I mean, that's ridiculous. So once again, to each their own. If somebody wants to have that many plants, great. If somebody doesn't want to have that many plants, fine. But let's just not, shun people for those things. Let's not shame them for that. Let's just recognize that everybody is their own person and that's what works best for them. So moving on, I want to talk about some things that actual plant growers do that drive me crazy. And they partially drive me crazy because I feel like they are just setting people up for failure. And one of those things, and this is not just plant growers that are guilty of this, a lot of bloggers, content creators, and just marketing people in general are guilty of this because they're doing what they can to try to sell more plants. And I will say everything I'm about to talk about regarding things that growers do, I understand why they do it. They do it because they are trying to make more money quicker, but that doesn't necessarily make it okay in my book. But this first one, people like to market plants as, well, we've talked before about low light tolerant plants. People love to market plants that way. And I have always told you guys, the key word there is tolerant. So I don't feel like they're lying to you. They are tolerant of the lower light, but they aren't going to love it and they might not want to live there forever. So they aren't totally lying to you when they say that. But this other thing that gets thrown out there a lot is a lie. It's a lie and it drives me crazy. And that is labeling plants as unkillable. You guys, any plant's killable. As a matter of fact, I could like make a whole video on surefire ways to kill an unkillable plant for you. And now that I think about that, that could be kind of an interesting video. I might put that one together for you guys in the future. But you can kill any kind of plant. I mean, plants you have outside can die from nothing you did. They could get a massive like fungal infection, a pest infection. I mean, they could freeze to death in the winter. No plant is unkillable. That is just insanely unreasonable to label a plant as unkillable. And all it really does is make somebody who has struggled with finding their green thumb think, this is the plant where I'm finally going to be able to keep it alive. They go out and buy it and then they end up killing it, and now they feel like an even bigger failure because somebody labeled it as unkillable. And this kind of goes back to that whole shaming thing. It also creates this world where if you do kill a plant that is supposedly labeled as unkillable, people tend to shame you more for it because it's, you know, got this connotation that it's this super easy plant. So, oh my God, how could you have possibly killed that? Well, once again, what's easy for me may not be easy for you, and vice versa. I know plenty of people out there who are amazingly awesome at keeping like super rare, difficult houseplants alive and thriving, and they struggle like an insane amount with some of the more common, you know, supposedly less killable plants. For example, say like your epipremnums. You know, a lot of people I know struggle with those, but do awesome with rarer plants that other people would like not even want to touch with a 10-foot pole because A, they're usually a little bit more expensive, and B, they feel like they're easier to kill. So we really just need to stop labeling plants as easy to kill or hard to kill, because really it just depends on the person, and it depends on the environment, and it depends on so many things that it's really not fair to be labeling plants that way, and it gives people like complexes that they don't need to have. So that's my 2 cents. But the next 2 things I want to talk about that growers do that is just shady and I do not like, and it drives me crazy, and you guys have actually heard me go on a bit of a PlanTEA Ranty in some of my videos before on these 2 things. And the first one is when growers sell not fully rooted cuttings in a pot of soil that is way too big for the amount of cuttings in there, and also typically in the incorrect type of soil. This drives me up the wall. And I do want to make a quick note, you guys, that I'm really talking about large scale growers here, not like your mom and pop shops where they're propagating their own plants and either selling them online or in a little boutique, you know, plant store. Because here's the thing, those people, they label what they're doing, and you will see it. I did a plant shop tour recently of Cultivar. I told you guys that they do plant purges via Facebook Marketplace every single week, and when they do that, they sell unrooted cuttings, but they label that it's an unrooted cutting. They tell you exactly what you're getting so you know up front. And they also have a big disclaimer saying, do not buy this if you do not know how to grow a plant from an unrooted cutting. And that is one thing, because then I know what I'm getting. I know what I'm getting myself into, right? But when these big growers do it and you have no idea until after you buy the plant, then you're left trying to salvage a plant, rehab a plant, and it's just, you know, it's a hassle. It's a hassle, and typically these plants are very often coming through big box stores where they're not being cared well for, and so already they're declining before they even get to you. And once again, I understand why they do it. You get more money for a larger plant, so if you put a bunch of cuttings in a 6-inch pot versus putting them in a 4-inch pot, you can charge more. They also put it in incorrect soil because it's easier for them to maintain them when they're still in the greenhouses because they don't have to water as often. But these plants typically are in a type of soil that they are not suited to, and then over time they end up getting root rot and various other problems if you don't get them out of that soil. So if they're gonna do it, you know what? I'm not gonna say they shouldn't do it, all right? If I owned a big old greenhouse full of plants, I probably wouldn't want to be watering as often either. But all I'm saying is, I think they should make a note. I think they should say, this soil was for the purposes of propagating and growing this plant, and, you know, after X amount of time when bringing it home, we recommend that you repot it in this type of soil. just state it up front, especially for people who are new to plants and don't know, because once again, they're gonna think the grower obviously knows what kind of soil it should be in, right? They wouldn't sell them a plant in incorrect soil. They're gonna bring it home, it's gonna die, and now they're gonna feel like a failure. So really, it's just not fair to the end user, and it just really aggravates me. I mean, I don't know. Comment down below and let me know if you feel the same way I do or not. But once again, just be polite about it and let me know why. But the next thing I want to talk about are plant plugs. And you guys know how I feel about plant plugs, and more lately, I feel like I'm discovering plugs on plants. And I actually did finally come across the plastic plugs that some of you guys had told me about that I had not heard of. I had not seen them before. And yeah, I see them now and I'm like, what? Like, that situation's even crazier to me than the fabric wrapped plugs. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, it became common, I guess it's not even necessarily common, it became more common of a practice a few years back for growers to start growing plants as plugs. So previously, the way they would grow plants would be in these large grow trays, and they would just put all the seedlings in there and they would be growing together. So then when they transplanted them into the pots that they were going to be in for selling them, to the distributors or the Lowe's or the Home Depots or your local plant stores or whatever it may be before they get to you, they would actually have to separate these plants out, and they would have to kind of pull their roots apart and everything, retransplant them. And because they were having to mess with the roots, you have transplant shock. So once they've repotted them, the plants now just don't grow for a little bit because they're trying to recover. So in order to cut back on the amount of time it takes for that plant to continue growing to the point where they can ship it off to be sold, they started doing plugs. So there's several ways that plugs can be done, but typically there's a tray and it has it kind of looks like an ice cube tray, if you will. And so each of those indentations is a place to put a plant seedling. Now what they would do is they'll take this substrate, they'll wrap it in fabric or some other material to hold it in there, and they will let it root like that. Once it gets roots, then all they do is they take that plug wrapped in fabric, stick it in a bigger pot with soil, fill it in, and now the plant doesn't have transplant shock. So it keeps growing and they're able to produce more plants more quickly, get them out the door more quickly, which makes them more money. So once again, I understand financially and from a business standpoint why they're doing it, but the problem is you get that plant and most of the time you don't know it's a plug. The other problem is the type of medium that they're using in that plug to seed a plant is a different type of medium than what they're planting it in once it has roots, because that's just the nature of the game. When you are growing from seeds, you have to have a different kind of substrate. But now you got two different substrates and they have different watering requirements. And so inevitably what ends up happening is that soil in that plug causes a root rot situation and the roots rot off and die. However, that plug also can cause restriction to root growth, and then the roots can't grow into the other soil and you have a similar problem. So that's why they get the nickname death plugs, right? And now we've started seeing these plastic net plugs, which this one is very confusing to me. But my thought process on this one is they must have done it because they recognized that maybe those fabric plugs were constricting the root growth. So if you have this plastic net bucket thing, and I'll see if I can find a picture to flash up on screen for you, that the roots can grow through those holes. But at a certain point, you're still restricting the plant. You still have the same issue of the substrate in that basket is different than what's around it. And really it just causes problems. And you know what? If you're gonna do it, fine. Put a label, once again, label it on the pot. This plant was produced from a plug. We highly recommend that you remove said plug within whatever amount of time of bringing this plant into your home. But better yet, I have a huge question, you guys. I understand why they don't want to disturb the roots, and so there's not transplant shock, but if they were to just cut the covering of that plug off before they moved it into the new pot, would that really be that difficult? And wouldn't that sort of resolve the problem? Now, you would still have the situation that around where that plug was, you have a different substrate and you're putting it into yet a different substrate. But now that you don't have that fabric wrapped around, in my mind, I'm thinking over time, as you water that plant, the substrate that was around those roots is going to kind of, get mixed in with that other substrate and hopefully reduce the chance of root rot significantly. So why not just cut them off before you repot them? But once again, I'm not a grower, so I don't know. Maybe that suggestion and thought in my brain is just completely absurd and makes no sense, and somebody who actually is a plant grower is probably laughing their ass off at me right now. But if any of you actually know, please share with us in the comments down below. But yeah, there's a reason they're called death plugs. I don't like them. If you find them on your plants, get them off as soon as possible. Try to wash all of the substrate that is around those roots off and then plant it back up into the appropriate soil type. And you can make sure that the plant will survive and thrive if you do that. But the next thing I want to talk about, and this is going to be our last subject for this HouseplanTEA Ranty video, and I saved it till the end because this one is very serious in my mind, and that is stealing plants. And I am going to need to clarify what I mean by stealing here, because I have discovered that a lot of people view certain activities as stealing and certain activities as not stealing. I really want to explain to you guys like how serious I take this, and part of the reason I take stealing plants very seriously is because I have been to botanical gardens, most recently in Hawaii, that look decimated. And they look decimated because people go in there with like a big old tote bag and some snips, and when nobody's looking, they snip cuttings off of these plants and they stick them in their bag and they go home with them, and then they grow them to have as their own or sell them or whatever it may be. This is not good for wildlife. This is not good for maintaining plants in the wild. It is not good for creating, you know, beautiful botanical garden experiences for people, because now the next person coming behind you is not going to see a beautiful lush plant growing in the wild. So that is why I am very, very against this kind of thing. And even though I'm talking about a botanical garden, there are people out there, and was it like 3 years ago now, you guys? Maybe even only 2 years ago, where like there was a TikTok trend of like people going around filming themselves like cutting plants of their neighbors in their yard, like slipping in, you know, at night and taking cuttings of the plants in their yard. Like, come on, you guys. Like, if you're actually on good terms with your neighbors, like I know if I went to a bunch of my neighbors, and actually my neighbor across the street just has been doing some crazy landscaping lately and it looks beautiful. But I know if I went over there and was like, hey, could I have a cutting of that plant and potentially swap you for a cutting of one of my plants that you might be interested in? She would 100% be a-okay with that. Now, I do want to say, you guys, don't just ask for cuttings. Like, what I just said was I was proposing a swap. Can I get a cutting of that for a cutting of that? Also, a faux pas in the houseplant community. Don't just ask for cuttings. If you are interested in getting a cutting from someone, propose a swap. Don't be that person who's just expecting to get something for basically free. But back to stealing plants. If you're on good terms with your neighbors, just approach it from that way. And who knows, maybe she might be like, hey, I'm not really interested in that plant, but I'll give you a cutting anyway. I mean, come on, you guys, just like talk to people, but don't go stealing stuff. And it is stealing, at least in the state I live in. That is trespassing, defacing property. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that you could get in trouble for doing that. And by all means, don't go into your local plant store with a big old tote bag either and start snipping plants. Now, you guys, I'm not going to shame anybody for, like, if you're walking through like Home Depot and a succulent leaf has fallen on the ground and you pick it up and take it home and grow it into a succulent, I'm not going to call that stealing. Some people might call that stealing, but if that succulent leaf got left on the ground, it's going to die. You know, they're going to sweep it up at night. I mean, you basically just like saved that succulent leaf from death, I guess, but don't go snapping succulent leaves off of plants and taking them home with you. And I don't care how much money you have dedicated to a store, because I spend tons of money at one particular store around here. That does not make you entitled to occasionally taking a cutting or snapping off a succulent leaf, all right? It does not. It does not. Just don't do it. It's not polite, you know, especially like smaller boutiques. There was a video that happened, I think sometime in the last week, that's been floating around on Instagram. I'll see if I can find it. But of these people who blatantly went into this like small boutique plant store and were stealing whole plants, not even just cuttings, slipping them into a tote bag. And it's like, these people who own their own business and are not part of a chain, it's even harder for them to make a living. So when you go and you do that, you're devaluing them, you're devaluing the plant community. It's just not a good practice, you guys. So just don't do it. Just, you know, if you can't afford to buy a plant, try to find somebody you can swap with. That is like the best way to get new plants if you don't have money to spend on plants. Join a local Facebook group, because I guarantee you there is a Facebook group in your area of plant lovers who are willing to swap plants with you. Look on, like, you know, Instagram, follow some of your favorite plant stores on Instagram. Lots of times they'll have plant swap events and they welcome all kinds of plants, not just rare plants, even common plants. And some people who have rare plants are willing to trade a small cutting of a rare plant for a full-size common plant. So if you have like, I don't know, 3 golden pothos that look amazing and are huge and you don't need 3, you probably can find somebody who's willing to trade you one of those for like a tiny, rarer Hoya cutting or something like that. There are so many other ways to get plants if you can't afford to, than to actually go out and steal them. So let's not let that practice continue being normalized. But once again, you guys, this is all kind of my opinion. If you disagree with me, that is fine. Please comment down below if you want to have a conversation about it further. Just be polite, give me your stance on it. Don't just say I'm wrong. I want to know why you think I'm wrong. I want to know what your proposed solution is as well. So just be friendly, you guys. And hopefully, the more we're friendly, the more we do best practices, the less likely I am to have to make HouseplanTEA Ranty videos. But hopefully you have enjoyed this. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Aloha!